The CEO's hand was shaking when he slid the revised financial report across his mahogany desk. The numbers had been altered. $17 million in losses magically transformed into a $3 million profit. My 6 years of protecting this company's reputation, 6 years of late nights and ethical battles, all came down to this single moment. He wanted me to sign off on a lie. "Just this once, Estrella," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just to get us through this quarter." I stood up, placed my badge on his desk, and walked out. It was exactly 4:03 p.m. on a Thursday, 27 steps from his office to the elevator, 42 seconds of descent to the parking garage. By the time I reached my car, 3 missed calls from him already lit up my phone. By 8:15 the next morning, everything had changed, but not in the way he expected. Before we continue, if stories about integrity, corporate warfare, and the power of standing your ground resonate with you, consider subscribing. We're building a community here, working our way to 5,000 subscribers who believe that truth still matters in the business world. No pressure, just an invitation to be part of something real. Now, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Estrella Montgomery, and until yesterday afternoon, I was the Chief Financial Officer at Helios Industries, a pharmaceutical company valued at $1.2 billion. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, daughter of a high school teacher and a mechanic. Money was never abundant, but values were. My parents taught me that your reputation is built on 1,000 small decisions to do the right thing, and it can be destroyed by one decision to do the wrong thing. That upbringing shaped everything about how I approached my career. I understood what it meant when workers worried about their pensions, when families depended on stable healthcare benefits, when communities relied on our factory jobs. I never forgot where I came from, and that made 6 years ago, Helios Industries recruited me from a mid-sized accounting firm where I'd built a reputation for forensic financial analysis. The company was growing fast, maybe too fast, and they needed someone who could structure their finances for a potential IPO. The CEO back then was a man named Richard Ashworth, methodical and careful, someone who valued sustainable growth over flashy quarterly reports. Richard retired 2 years ago. That's when everything started shifting. The board brought in Kyle Hendricks as the new CEO. Kyle came from a venture capital background, all aggressive expansion and market domination. In his first meeting with department heads, he told us that adequate wasn't good enough anymore. We needed to be exceptional, extraordinary, explosive. His words. I should have recognized the warning signs then. For the first year, Kyle's strategy worked. We acquired 2 smaller pharmaceutical companies, expanded our research division, and broke ground on a new manufacturing facility in North Carolina. Our stock price climbed steadily. Investors were happy, the board was thrilled. But I saw what others didn't. I saw the debt accumulating. I saw the research costs ballooning without proportional returns. I saw the quarterly reports getting harder and harder to balance without creative accounting. Creative but still legal, still ethical. Until 3 months ago. The research division had been working on a revolutionary treatment for a rare autoimmune disorder. Kyle had promised investors we'd have FDA approval by the end of the fiscal year. He'd built the entire year's projections around this drug reaching market. The FDA rejected our application. Not a delay, not a request for additional testing. A flat rejection based on insufficient efficacy data. That single decision cratered our projected revenue by 43%. Kyle called an emergency meeting with me and our chief operating officer, a woman named Lauren Westbrook. Lauren had been with the company for 9 years, longer than both of us. She understood the operations inside and out, but she also understood the political dynamics of corporate survival. We're not reporting the FDA decision until next quarter, Kyle announced. That gives us time to find alternative revenue streams and soften the blow. I immediately shook my head. That's a material event. We're legally required to disclose it within 4 business days. Kyle's jaw tightened. We'll disclose that we're in ongoing discussions with the FDA, which is technically true. We're appealing. An appeal that has a 6% historical success rate, I countered. Any investor doing basic due diligence would know that. We'd be deliberately misleading them. Lauren stayed quiet, her eyes moving between us like she was watching a tennis match that would determine her career. Astria, I need you to be a team player here, Kyle said, his tone shifting to something almost paternal. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, just strategic timing. I spent that night reviewing securities regulations, consulting with 2 lawyer friends who specialized in corporate compliance, and barely sleeping. By morning, I had my answer. What Kyle wanted existed in a gray zone, technically defensible but ethically compromised. I told him we needed to disclose it properly. He agreed, reluctantly, but he agreed. We took a hit in the stock price, about 14% over 2 weeks, but then it stabilized. Investors appreciated the transparency. Several even reached out. The next 2 months became a chess game I didn't realize I was playing. Kyle started excluding me from certain executive meetings. Not overtly, just convenient scheduling conflicts or quick informal discussions that happened to involve major financial decisions. Lauren got promoted to executive vice president, a new position created specifically for her with a salary that now exceeded mine. The message was clear: loyalty was being rewarded, principle was being sidelined. Then came the quarterly projections. Our numbers were bad, not catastrophic, but definitely disappointing. We were looking at a $7 million loss for the quarter, potentially stretching to $17 million depending on some outstanding litigation settlements. In a stable, long-term view, this was manageable. We had strong fundamentals, valuable patents, and a solid pipeline of products in development. One bad quarter wouldn't sink us. But Kyle had made promises. He'd told investors this would be a growth quarter. He'd personally guaranteed continued profitability during 3 separate earnings calls. He'd built a narrative, and now reality was refusing to cooperate. 2 weeks before the quarter closed, Kyle hired a new accounting consultant, supposedly to help optimize our financial reporting. The consultant's name was Timothy Rourke, and he came from a firm that specialized in aggressive tax strategies and creative financial structures. Timothy spent 3 days reviewing our books. Then he presented what he called an alternative accounting framework. The framework involved reclassifying certain research expenses as capital investments, recognizing revenue from contracts that hadn't been finalized, and adjusting our inventory valuations based on projected market demand rather than current costs. Each individual adjustment was technically within the bounds of generally accepted accounting principles. You could find arguments and precedents for every single change. But taken together, they transformed our financial reality. Suddenly, our $17 million loss became a $3 million profit. I sat in that presentation and felt something cold settle in my stomach. These adjustments are extremely aggressive, I said carefully. Any forensic accountant would question them immediately. Timothy smiled. That's why we include extensive footnotes explaining our methodology. Everything is disclosed. Disclosed in language designed to obscure rather than illuminate, I replied. Kyle interrupted. Astria, every company in our sector uses some form of adjusted accounting. We'd be naive not to compete on the same playing field. There's a difference between adjusted accounting and deliberately misleading accounting, I said. The room went silent. Lauren studied her laptop screen. Timothy shuffled his papers. Kyle's face flushed red. Kyle walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, every inch the contemplative leader. It was a pose I'd seen him practice before investor calls. How long have we worked together? He asked. 2 years, 4 months. Have I ever asked you to do anything illegal? Not explicitly. He turned. Not explicitly. Astria, I've been nothing but transparent with you. You've been transparent about wanting results. You've been less transparent about the methods you're willing to use to achieve them. This industry is brutal, Kyle said, his voice rising. We're competing against companies that spend billions on research, that have regulatory departments larger than our entire workforce. If we don't show consistent growth, we get swallowed. Our stock becomes a target for hostile takeovers. Everything we've built disappears. I understand the pressure, I said, but falsifying our financial position doesn't solve our problems. It delays them and makes them exponentially worse when the truth emerges. We're not falsifying anything. We're interpreting accounting standards in our favor the same way everyone else does. Kyle, I've reviewed Timothy's proposals in detail. Some of those revenue recognitions are fraudulent. There are contracts in there that don't exist yet, that might never exist. You're asking investors to make decisions based on fictional income. His face hardened. I'm asking my CFO to support her CEO and her company. I support this company by ensuring our financial reports are accurate. Your job is to present our finances in the most favorable light possible within legal boundaries. My job is to present our finances accurately. Favorable is a byproduct of good business decisions, not accounting tricks. Kyle sat down across from me, changing tactics. His voice softened. Astria, I respect your integrity. I really do. It's one of the reasons we hired you. But integrity without context is just inflexibility. And flexibility without boundaries is just corruption. He flinched. That's a strong word. It's an accurate word for what you're asking me to do. I'm asking you to sign off on an accounting interpretation. That's all. You're asking me to put my name on financial statements I know are misleading. My professional license, my personal reputation, my legal liability. You're asking me to risk all of that so you can avoid disappointing investors for 1 quarter. This isn't about 1 quarter. This is about survival. Companies survive by adapting and improving, not by lying about their performance. Kyle stood abruptly. I need an answer, Astria. Will you sign off on the quarterly report or not? Not as currently structured. Give me accurate numbers, and I'll work with you to present them as favorably as possible. Ask me to certify false numbers, and my answer is no. Then I need to know if you're committed to this company's future. I'm committed to this company having a future, which means I won't let you destroy it with securities fraud. His eyes went cold. You're being dramatic. I'm being realistic. The SEC has been increasing scrutiny on pharmaceutical companies specifically because of aggressive accounting practices. If we file these statements and they launch an investigation, we're looking at massive fines, potential criminal charges, and complete destruction of investor confidence. You think 1 bad quarter is hard to recover from? Try recovering from a fraud investigation. I went home that night and barely slept. I kept running scenarios, looking for a path that preserved both my integrity and my career. Maybe there was a compromise I hadn't considered. Maybe I was being too rigid. By 3 in the morning, I'd reviewed every document, every regulation, every precedent I could find. The conclusion was the same. What Kyle wanted was wrong. Maybe defensible in court if you had an army of expensive lawyers, but wrong. I thought about the investors who trusted our reports. Pension funds managing retirement savings for teachers and firefighters. Individual investors planning for their children's education. Institutional funds managing university endowments. They made decisions based on the information we provided. If that information was deliberately misleading, we were stealing from them as surely as if we'd picked their pockets. I also thought about the employees at Helios. The research scientists working overtime to develop life-saving medications, the manufacturing workers in our facilities, the administrative staff managing everything behind the scenes. If this fraud was discovered, those people would lose their jobs, not the executives who made the decisions. Us, we'd get golden parachutes and move on to the next opportunity. But the workers who depended on stable employment would suffer. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I also knew I needed insurance. I spent the next week quietly documenting everything. I made copies of Timothy's proposals, Kyle's emails, meeting notes, and preliminary financial drafts showing the real numbers versus the adjusted numbers. I stored everything in encrypted cloud storage, with automated sharing protocols, if I failed to check in regularly. Then I reached out to someone I'd been building a relationship with over the past 3 years, Andrew Collington. Andrew was a partner at Vanguard Peak Capital, one of our largest institutional investors. They held 12% of Helios Industries' outstanding stock. Andrew sat on our board of advisors, though not the executive board, which meant he had insight into the company without being directly involved in day-to-day decisions. More importantly, Andrew had a reputation for ethical investing. His fund had publicly divested from companies caught in accounting scandals. He'd written several editorial pieces about the need for corporate transparency. I'd gotten to know him through quarterly investor briefings and occasional conference calls. We discovered a shared interest in classic literature and often exchanged book recommendations. Our relationship was professional but friendly. I sent him a carefully worded email requesting a private conversation about concerns regarding our upcoming quarterly report. Nothing specific, nothing that would create legal obligations for either of us yet, just a request to talk. He agreed immediately. We met at a quiet coffee shop halfway between our offices. I chose a Thursday morning, assuming that would give me time to Andrew arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of someone who already suspected bad news. We ordered coffee, exchanged pleasantries about the weather and a recent bestseller we'd both read, and then got to business. "Your email concerned me," Andrew said simply. I slid a folder across the table. "This concerns me more." He opened it and began reading. I'd included a summary document comparing the actual financial position against the adjusted version Timothy had proposed, with specific annotations highlighting the most egregious manipulations. Andrew read in silence for several minutes. His expression never changed, but I noticed his grip on the pages tightening. Finally, he looked up. "Has Kyle seen these adjustments?" "He commissioned them. And he's planning to file the adjusted version." "Unless I agree to certify it, yes." "What happens if you refuse?" "I don't know. Best case, he finds a more compliant CFO and I lose my job. Worst case, he files anyway and I become a whistleblower to prevent fraud." Andrew leaned back, processing. "You understand what you're risking by bringing this to me?" "My career, potentially my professional reputation, definitely my current job." "Why not go directly to the SEC?" "Because I still believe in this company. Our fundamentals are strong, our research is valuable, we have good people doing important work. One bad quarter doesn't change that. And Kyle, despite his current lapse in judgment, has skills that could be valuable under proper oversight." "You think this is salvageable?" "I think with the right pressure from investors, Kyle can be brought back to reality. I think if he understands that the major shareholders won't tolerate accounting fraud, he'll abandon this plan. But if I go straight to regulators, the company gets dragged through an investigation that could destroy value for everyone." Andrew nodded slowly. "You want the investors to intervene before it becomes a regulatory matter." "I want the investors to protect their investment by ensuring honest reporting." "That's a generous interpretation of my fiduciary duties," Andrew said with a slight smile. "It's an accurate interpretation." He closed the folder. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing transparency. I'm giving you information that you, as a significant investor, deserve to have. What you do with that information is entirely your decision. And if I decide to use this information to pressure for leadership changes, then you'd be protecting your fund's investment. And if Kyle retaliates against you, then I'll deal with that. But Andrew, he can only retaliate against me. He can't retaliate against 12% of his shareholders, especially not when those shareholders coordinate with other institutional investors." Understanding dawned in Andrew's eyes. "You think I won't be alone in this?" "I think when Vanguard Peak Capital raises concerns about accounting irregularities, other institutional investors will ask their own questions. I think those questions will spread quickly, and I think Kyle will find himself facing a choice between admitting he made a mistake and losing his position entirely." "You've thought this through." "I've thought about little else for the past 2 weeks." Andrew was quiet for a moment. "I need to make some calls. I need to verify some of this information through our own due diligence. But Astria, if what you're showing me is accurate, Vanguard Peak will act. It's accurate. The next morning, Kyle called me into his office at 9 a.m. sharp. His assistant's face was sympathetic when she showed me in, which told me everything I needed to know. Lauren was already there, standing near the window with her arms crossed. A man I didn't recognize sat in one of the guest chairs, wearing an expensive suit and an HR professional expression. Astria, this is Raymond Fisher from our legal counsel, Kyle said. Please sit down. I remained standing. What's this about? We need to discuss your continued employment at Helios Industries. I see. On what grounds? Raymond spoke up. The company is restructuring the finance department to better align with strategic objectives. Your position is being eliminated. Interesting timing, I said, given that we're 2 weeks from quarterly filing deadlines. The timing is unfortunate but necessary, Kyle said. And what happens to the quarterly report? We've made arrangements. Lauren will assume CFO responsibilities on an interim basis while we search for a permanent replacement. I looked at Lauren. She met my eyes but said nothing. So you found someone willing to sign off on Timothy's adjustments, I said. Kyle's face reddened. This meeting isn't about accounting methodologies. Actually, I think it's entirely about accounting methodologies. I think I'm being terminated because I refuse to certify fraudulent financial statements. Raymond interjected smoothly. Miss Montgomery, I'd caution you about making defamatory statements. Defamatory implies false, I interrupted. I'm happy to repeat everything I just said under oath. Kyle slammed his hand on the desk. Enough. Astria, you've been a valuable employee, but your inability to adapt to changing business needs makes you a poor fit for our current direction. We're offering a generous severance package in exchange for a standard non-disparagement agreement. How generous? Raymond slid a document across the desk. I skimmed it quickly. 6 months' salary, continued health benefits for a year, and immediate vesting of my stock options. In exchange for signing away my right to speak publicly about anything related to Helios Industries. I'll need time to review this with my own attorney, I said. You have until end of business today, Kyle said. Security will escort you from the building now. You can collect your personal items under supervision. It was humiliating and calculated. They wanted me off balance, pressured into signing without thinking too carefully about what I was giving up. I looked at Kyle directly. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you to prioritize this company over your own self-righteousness. No, I said quietly. Your mistake was thinking I was the only person who would care about what you're doing. Something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe, but he covered it quickly. Goodbye, Astria. I walked out without another word. Security escorted me to my office, watched while I packed my personal photos and books into a card. The caller ID showed Andrew Collington's number. Have you seen the news? He asked without preamble. What news? Kyle issued a press release at 7 this morning announcing your departure. He's framing it as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. Of course he is. Astria, what he doesn't know is that Vanguard Peak filed a formal inquiry with the board last night demanding access to preliminary quarterly financials and independent verification of accounting methodologies. My heart rate picked up. Last night, we weren't planning to move this quickly, but when I reached out to our usual contacts on the executive board, I discovered we weren't the first to raise concerns. Turns out 3 other institutional investors had independently flagged irregularities based on preliminary reports they'd received. How is that possible? The adjusted reports haven't been filed yet. No, but Kyle has been sharing them in private briefings with select investors, trying to build confidence ahead of the official release. He apparently didn't anticipate that some of those investors would compare notes with their own analysts and notice the discrepancies. I felt a smile forming. He tried to manage the narrative, and instead created a paper trail of fraud. By 8 this morning, we had 7 institutional investors representing 41% of outstanding shares demanding an emergency board meeting. 41%. Kyle's been calling them individually all morning trying to explain, but every call just makes it worse. He's claiming the numbers are preliminary, that there were miscommunications, that you were supposed to refine the methodology before filing. He's blaming me. Aggressively, which is why I need to ask, are you willing to go on record about what actually happened? I thought about the severance package sitting unsigned on my kitchen table. Signing it would mean 6 months of financial security and a clean break. Refusing it would mean potential legal battles, professional controversy, and uncertainty. It would also mean telling the truth. I'm willing, I said. Then can you be at the Helios Industries headquarters by 9:30? The emergency board meeting is at 10, and several board members want to speak with you first. I was escorted out by security yesterday. You'll be escorted in by board members today. Things have changed. I arrived at 9:28 a.m., wearing my best suit and carrying a portfolio with every piece of documentation I'd collected. 3 board members met me in the lobby: Andrew Collington, Elizabeth Thornton from Mercury Investments, and James Latimer from the Pinnacle Group. They brought me to a conference room where I spent the next 45 minutes walking through everything. The timeline of Kyle's increasing pressure, Timothy's proposals, the specific accounting manipulations, my refusal to certify, and my termination. Elizabeth, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharper eyes, took notes throughout. When I finished, she said simply, "Thank you for your integrity, Miss Montgomery. It's rare and valuable." At exactly 10 a.m., they brought me into the main boardroom. Kyle was already there, sitting at the head of the table with Lauren beside him. His face went white when he saw me. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "Miss Montgomery has been invited by the board to provide testimony regarding recent financial reporting concerns," James said calmly. "She's a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. She's your former CFO." Kyle tried every tactic. He claimed I'd misunderstood his intentions. He suggested I was overreacting to standard accounting practices. He implied I had personal motivations for sabotaging the company. But the board members had done their homework. They'd reviewed Timothy's proposals. They'd compared the real numbers to the adjusted versions. They'd consulted with their own forensic accountants. And they discovered something I hadn't known. This wasn't Kyle's first attempt at financial manipulation. At his previous company, before joining Helios, there had been questions about aggressive revenue recognition that led to a quiet SEC settlement. Kyle had left before any formal charges were filed, but the pattern was there. The board had missed it during their initial vetting because the settlement was sealed, and Kyle's references were all from before the controversy. But Andrew's team had found it. "You have a history of this," Elizabeth said, her voice cold. "You've made a career of inflating short-term results to boost stock prices, then moving on before the consequences catch up." "That's a gross mischaracterization," Kyle protested. "Then explain why you attempted to terminate Miss Montgomery less than 24 hours after she refused to certify questionable financials." "I terminated her because she was insubordinate and obstructionist." "She was ethical and professional," James countered, "which you apparently found threatening." Lauren, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. "For the record, I want to state that I had serious reservations about the accounting adjustments as well. I agreed to review them only on the understanding that they would be properly vetted by external auditors before filing." Kyle turned to her betrayed. "Lauren." "I'm sorry, Kyle, but I won't go down with this ship. You asked me to trust your judgment, but after speaking with my own attorney last night, I realize I was being asked to participate in securities fraud." The meeting continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable. By 1:15 p.m., Kyle Hendricks was no longer the CEO of Helios Industries. The board voted unanimously to terminate him for cause, which meant no severance package, no golden parachute. They offered the interim CEO position to Lauren, with the understanding that she would work closely with the board and would face a full review before being considered for the permanent role. And they asked me to return as CFO. I negotiated. I wanted a seat on the executive board, direct reporting access to the full board of directors, and written authority to halt any financial filing I deemed inaccurate without executive override. They agreed to all of it. I also insisted they rescind the non-disparagement agreement they tried to force on me and issue a public statement clarifying that my departure had been reversed due to board intervention. They agreed to that too. By 4 p.m., I was back in my office, the same office I'd been escorted out of 24 hours earlier. My assistant, a brilliant young woman named Hannah, knocked on my door around 4:30. "I just want to say I'm really glad you're back," she said. "A lot of us were pretty upset about what happened yesterday." "Thank you, Hannah. That means more than you know. Also, Kyle's here." Kyle looked smaller somehow, diminished. The security guard waited outside my door, giving us privacy but staying close enough to intervene if needed. "I underestimated you," Kyle said without preamble. "You underestimated the consequences of fraud." "I wasn't trying to commit fraud, I was trying to save the company. By lying to the people who invested in it. By buying us time to turn things around." I leaned back in my chair. "Kyle, I genuinely believe you thought you were doing the right thing. That's what makes this tragic rather than just criminal. You convinced yourself that the ends justified the means. And you're so certain they don't." "In this case, absolutely. Because your means involved betraying the trust of everyone who depended on honest information. Investors, employees, regulators, the public. You were willing to sacrifice all of them for short-term stock performance. Easy to be righteous when you're sitting in that chair, and I'm being escorted out. I'm sitting in this chair because I refused to be in your position. That was a choice, Kyle. You made different choices." He was quiet for a moment. "The board is going to file a complaint with the SEC, aren't they?" "I don't know, that's their decision." "Will you recommend it?" "I'll recommend we cooperate fully with any investigation and focus on rebuilding trust through transparency. What consequences you face will depend on what the investigation finds. You could put in a good word for me. Tell them I was under pressure, that I made mistakes but didn't have criminal intent." "I could, but I won't." His face hardened. So much for empathy. Empathy doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their choices. You tried to coerce me into committing fraud, and when I refused, you tried to destroy my career. I have empathy for the position you're in, but I won't help you escape accountability." Kyle stood. "I hope you're proud of yourself." "I'm proud that I acted with integrity. I'm sad that it cost you your career, but I'm not responsible for that. You are." Security escorted him out. I watched from my window as he walked to his car, carrying a single cardboard box of personal items. 27 steps from the building to the parking garage, 42 seconds to drive away. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Over the following weeks, things stabilized. We filed our quarterly report with accurate numbers. The stock took a hit, about 18% over 10 days, but then steadied as investors appreciated our transparency and the board's decisive action. Several major investment firms actually increased their positions, citing improved governance as a reason for confidence in our long-term prospects. Lauren proved herself as interim CEO, focusing on operational efficiency and research development rather than aggressive expansion. The board made her appointment permanent after 3 months. Timothy Rourke's consulting firm lost several major clients after word spread about the Helios situation. Last I heard, he was facing a professional ethics investigation. As for me, I implemented new financial controls, hired additional oversight staff, and worked with the board to develop policies preventing future manipulation attempts. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months later. We released our next quarterly report. The numbers were solid, not spectacular. We showed modest growth, controlled costs, and sustainable practices. Everything was accurate, verified, and honest. The stock price increased 12% in a single day. One investor called me directly. "This is what we wanted all along," he said. "Real performance we can trust. Thank you." That phone call made every difficult moment worthwhile. Standing up to Kyle could have destroyed my career. Instead, it defined it. I learned that integrity isn't just about personal morality. It's about understanding that trust is the foundation of every business relationship. Investors trust that our numbers are real. Employees trust that their livelihoods are built on solid ground. The public trusts that we're following the rules. Betray that trust, and you might gain a quarter or two of it. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that integrity still matters in business and in life, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe. We're building a community here, working toward 5,000 subscribers who believe truth is worth defending. Your subscription means you'll be part of that community, and that means something. Thank you for listening to my story. Whatever challenges you're facing, whatever pressure you're under to compromise your values, remember, the hardest decision often turns out to be the right one. And sometimes, doing the right thing is its own reward. Sometimes, it's also the smartest business decision.